Audio.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Season 2 of the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. We've got some really exciting guests coming up. Subscribe to the show. Then you'll know each time a new episode is released. I'm Steve Balderson, and you're listening to the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. In this podcast, we meet with filmmakers, writers, actors, artists, and other notables. Today's guest is one of my favorite filmmakers, Bruce LaBruce. He has written and directed 13 feature films, including his most recent, Saint Narcisse, which closed the independent section of the Venice Film Festival. Bruce LaBruce has also been honored with film retrospectives at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. All of the films have now become part of MoMA's permanent film collection.
For most of my movies, I take a fetish as a starting point, and also a number of movies that are for some reason kind of like on my mind or that I've been thinking about and or have seen recently, old movies that kind of inspire me. So for Saint Narcisse, I was interested in twincest, the idea of twincest. In fact, the working title of the film was Twincest. And I just made a film. We started writing this a long time ago, probably 2015 or something. And I had just made a film called Gerontophilia, which was also shot in Montreal, also financed by Quebec government financial funding agencies. And I had collaborated on the screenplay for Gerontophilia with a well-known Quebecois screenwriter, Martin Gerard. That one was based on the fetish of Gerontophilia, obviously. And I was thinking of movies, not just Harold and Maude, but like, I saw it as a reverse Lolita in a weird way, and also Canadian movies. I'm sort of obsessed with Canadian movies, even though a lot of people don't know I'm from Canada, and I've made like movies in all over the world, like LA and Berlin and Paris and London. And I hadn't made a movie in Canada since before Hustler White. So I decided to go back, and Quebec is much more open to me than Anglophone Canada. The Quebec film industry is very developed, and it has like a really strong cultural identity. And they make more like European art films. And so I wrote the film with Martin, and who's an award-winning Quebecois screenwriter. And we developed the idea. So it was based on the idea of twincest, because I've been seeing a lot of twincest porn. And I've always been interested in twins. I've had best friends who are twins growing up and stuff. And then I'm just in love with Quebecois cinema. So I was referencing a lot of Quebecois films from the 1970s, particularly Paul Almond, who is the husband of Geneviève Bujold, the great French-Canadian international star. So they made a trilogy together called Isabelle, Act of the Heart, and Journey. And so I wanted the film to look like that, to have that quality. Quebecois films from that era are quite often about dark secrets from the past, skeletons in the closet, often involving some kind of psychosexual trauma, could be rape or incest or, some kind of death in the family or. So I was kind of referencing that genre. I'd always also wanted to make a film about lesbians living in the woods. And so I was referencing Mark Rydell's film, The Fox, which was made in 1967 with Sandy Dennis and Anne Haywood and Keir Dullea. It's based on a D.H. Lawrence story, which I also read. And it's about lesbians living in the woods whose idyllic life is interrupted by this straight sort of huntsman. So that was the genesis of it. And also Robert Altman's Images, which came out in 1974, which is about a doppelganger. And I've always wanted to make a doppelganger film. So if you mash all those together, that's where the movie came from.
Does it come to you in images first or subtext?
It usually comes to me, like I said, the fetish is often the starting point, and then it's really the movies. So for me, I came out of this kind of 80s academic environment, which was all about semiotics and postmodern, post-structuralism. And even though I resisted it a lot and wasn't totally into it, because my main mentor, the Professor Robin Wood in university, he was a great internationally renowned film critic, like the favorite of Truffaut and Arthur Penn and Scorsese. And he was really anti French post-structuralism. But I did pick up this habit, I think, of like semiotics and of appropriation, détournement, and queering texts. So I usually start like queering a movie that maybe has had a homosexual subtext, but then I bring the subtext to text. I did that with Sunset Boulevard and Hustler White. I did it even like Otto references like specific zombie movies like George Romero, but I make them queer, and that's part of the process. And it's often I'm very much like into bricolage and like collage. So I'll often take like scenes from other movies, my favorite movies, dialogue, just scenarios, and kind of like write them in my script, quite often, quite heavily, like I'm a real thief, And in fact, now when I watch some of my older films, I can't even tell. Sometimes I know that a line I knew I stole up from somewhere, but I can't even remember where I stole it from.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I've done that too, in the sense, like when I first sat down to do my first movie, I took the formula, like the structure from one and the structure from another and like parts of another, and I just sort of smashed them all together because I thought, oh, that's so effective. And it has to do, with something that I'm going for here. But then I just threw up my stuff on top of it.
Yeah.
And
the trick to doing that is to make it your own. It's your own style, your own personal point of view. A lot of people steal or borrow from other people, but then it's kind of just like almost like a replica or like a retelling or something. I think the trick is to actually have it reflect your total like aesthetic and your sensibility.
Totally. And certainly the inspiration that you had, that person was inspired by probably something else that was exactly the same.
Well, the D.H. Lawrence story is a good idea. Like D.H. Lawrence made a movie out of, Mark Rydell made a film out of the D.H. Lawrence novella. And if you go back, I did a comparative analysis of them for Talkhouse Film. And it's really interesting because his was written in the 20s, I think, 10s, 20s in the 20th century, the Lawrence one. And it's kind of amazing how the lesbian subtext it's not very subtext. I mean, it's very much there. And it is in the Rydell movie as well, but it's more, it's kind of more hidden in a way because it was Hollywood in the 60s, You could get away with a lot more in the 30s, writers like D.H. Lawrence. And then I remade Robert Altman's That Cold Day in the Park, which was based on a novel called That Cold Day in the Park by Richard Miles, which was very queer. And when Altman made it, and he was a gay writer, and when Altman made it in 1970 or 69, he really removed the homosexual aspect of it, even though it's there as a subtext. Like the kid that Sandy Dennis picks up in the park is heavily coded as a hustler, but it's not explicitly stated that way. And everything's more kind of heterosexual. And so when I remade it as No Skin Off Mass in the early 90s, mine is completely queer, and it makes it completely contemporary. It's like about a skinhead a hairdresser has a fixation on a neo-Nazi skinhead. Yeah. So it's like, it was queer to begin with. It got de-queered by Hollywood, and then I re-queered it, but in a punk kind of way.
That's
and
so
actually,
great.
incidentally, when when I showed the film in Los Angeles at the Outfest, somebody brought Richard Miles, the original author of That Cold Day in the Park, to the screening. And I even used like clips from the movie in the film, and without, obviously without permission or whatever. So I thought he was really good. I was really scared. I thought he was really going to hate it. And he actually loved it. And he had a signed copy of his book that he dedicated to me. And he wrote, you got it right. And he said he liked it better than the Altman version. So
excellent. That's so good.
Yeah.
When did you take an interest in pornography in cinema? Was it always there, or was it just something that you just said, why aren't these things together? I don't know. Tell me just a little bit about that.
Well, those two of the movies I just mentioned are a good example, because I grew up in Canada. I grew up in a rural environment, pre-internet. We had 2 TV stations, and it was very disconnected from the rest of the world. It was kind of a rough, tough kind of environment. But the CBC at that time, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is like the BBC for Canada, they would, in the 70s, they would actually show they'd show full frontal nudity. They would show kind of very risque films, Canadian films like Kameruska by Claude Jutra or Les Bons Débarras by Francis Mankiewicz. And so I would see these films, and I saw this Paul Allman film starring Geneviève Bujold, that The Act of the Heart, on TV when I was a kid. It came out in 70. I saw it probably in 72 or something. It's about this girl from the country who goes to Montreal, and she ends up having an affair with a priest, Donald Sutherland, who ends up fucking her on the altar of the Catholic Church. And then at the end of the movie, she goes to the park and douses herself with gasoline and sets herself on fire. So it's a very tough, kind of psychosexual, religious ecstasy kind of movie, And so on my, teenage brain, I was just like, what is this? Is this pornography? Why is sex so crazy? Why does it drive people to such extremes? Why are religion and sex connected? And That Cold Day in the Park had a similar effect. I also saw it as a teenager on CBC, and it was shot in Vancouver. And I was because she ends up hiring a prostitute for this young hustler she keeps locked in her guest bedroom. And then she introduces the prostitute to him, and then she runs into the room and stabs the prostitute in a jealous frenzy. I also remember thinking as a kid, is this what pornography is? I mean, is it like this violence and jealousy and, again, psychosexual confinement and kind of torture and so those kinds of films made a big impression on me. But my first real kind of exposure to something pornographic was my older brother's kind of books that he would bring home from university. He was a lot older than me. And so I'd find in his room, I'd find Naked Lunch by William Burroughs and Tropic of Capricorn by Henry Miller and Spy in the House of Love by Anais Nin. And that was my first exposure to pornography. It was literary, not visual.
How would you define the word?
Pornography?
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting word because it has, it has a pejorative term, like you say, food in a way, or food pornography or poverty porn, or all these expressions. It's meant to be something that is indulged in, something that is overindulged in, something that you obsess on, and then in general, it signifies movies that have sexually explicit scenes of penetration. That's usually the dividing line for me, is the close-ups of the penetration and the duration of the sex scenes. Tony Ward used to say you can tell pornography by the lighting, but that's another thing. There's a aesthetic kind of differences as well, because it's usually more low budget, and the narrative is, especially post 70s, the narrative is not as important. So but I personally try to not really make much of a distinction between art art and porn. So for me, anyone who makes pornography is an artist on a certain level, or a filmmaker on a certain level. It's, a creative endeavor. You're telling stories, etc. It has its aesthetics. And I mean, in the 70s, when all the porn was made on actual film, 16 millimeter for gay porn and 35 millimeter for straight porn, you had to know film technology. You had to have the equipment, which was expensive. You had to know how to operate it, which was complicated. So those films are more cinematic, and more, and they reflect more of the industry, because a lot of those people worked in the mainstream industry, because a lot of people worked in the mainstream Hollywood film industry and then made these films on the weekends and at night with equipment they would borrow from their day job, So it had a different quality, but I still think it's all artistic on a certain level. Like all art, 90% of it is bad art, but I appreciate it still as an art form. However, in my career, I've always been caught sort of in the middle between pornography and art. So people in the art world think my products are too pornographic, because I quite often work more within pornographic conventions. And people in the porn world are very skeptical of me, and they think I'm an artist who's kind of intruding or kind of exploiting porn. I'm not a pure pornographer. I have questionable motives for using porn in my art.
Why do you think so many of the directors and filmmakers who either have done, directed porn or worked in any adult erotic area were ashamed by it at first, and how some of them have admitted it, or the ones who still haven't? The shame that's there, I think, is pretty interesting. Like, I'm really curious about where that comes from.
Well, I mean, I wrote a book, in the late 90s called The Reluctant Pornographer. And so I've always expressed ambivalence about porn. I didn't intend to be a pornographer to begin with. My producer, Jürgen Bruning, and I, who produced my early features, we made 3 features, No Skin Off My Ass, Super 8.5, and Hustler White, that we didn't consider porn. We considered them sexually explicit art films. But we kind of gained reputations as porn as pornographers because of them. And then I tried after Hustler White to make bigger budgeted independent features, and I wasn't able to get one financed. So Jürgen started, even though it was an international sort of, cult hit, but we were kind of pegged with this, idea that we were pornographers, and there's a glass ceiling for pornographers. I think that was part of it. So Jürgen started the first ever porn company in Berlin, Katzo Film, and I started making, feature films for him that were definitely porn, but I insisted on making a softcore version as well, which I would release theatrically and separately on DVD under a different title. And so I did that for 4 films. In terms of the ambivalence and reluctance, I mean, it's, the porn can be extremely exploitative and especially towards women. And it's such a huge industry that there's a lot of bad stuff being made. There's a lot of kind of opportunity for it attracts people who are already sexually damaged or have had some kind of abuse. I mean, I know that's a small proportion probably of people who work in it. And it's also like there's shame in the culture in general. And so it's the way that people treat you. Like I found that even after I made my first 3 films, that people kind of treat you in a different way. They expect you to be more sexually available to them. They expect you to be a kind of exhibitionistic kind of pervert or something. They expect you, there's all these expectations placed on you. So I think people kind of maybe internalize that a bit, that people look down at their noses at you. They think you're, even though they all watch pornography, they hypocritically kind of look down their noses at you. They think that, I guess they think that porn just gets magically made by, pixies or something, that it's not real people who are making it. I've dealt with all those prejudices. In fact, my second film, Super 8.5, is about that very subject. I play a washed up porn star who people start regarding as an artist, and he has a mental block. He can no longer make porn because he thinks he's an artist now.
Filmmaker Bruce LaBruce. Another great guest is Academy Award nominee Sally Kirkland.
And my girlfriend had told me, Sally, you're going to have to fuck him. You're going to have to. This is the lead role in The Godfather. And I said, but I've been celibate for however many months I can. And she said, Sally, this is Francis Ford Coppola. You're going to have to fuck him.
You can hear my full talk with Sally in our archives at filmmakingconfidential.com or by subscribing for free to this podcast. We'll talk more about porn, Saint Narcisse, guerrilla filmmaking, and more with Bruce LaBruce right after this. Stay with us. I'm Steve Balderson, and this is the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. I'm back with Bruce LaBruce.
I think that every filmmaker should either participate, direct, film, or be a part of any explicit adult project. To simulate sex is one thing.
Yeah.
To document and capture actual sex is not easy.
Yeah. But yeah, there is a kind of gray area where Erika Lusk, one of their kind of earmarks is they like the sex to not look like porny, too porny. They want it to kind of feel more spontaneous and natural. And also it's more from a woman's point of view. Yeah, for sure. There's porn films that are extremely kind of fake. I mean, it's so obvious that people aren't into each other. They're just kind of like doing it for the paycheck. The production values are horrible, and they're just, they've had no rehearsal, and they just kind of push it through. But then there's a lot of companies now doing more, insisting on production values, good production values, and wanting to have more kind of natural sex. So in that way, I think the gap between mainstream film and porn film is kind of narrowing in some ways.
Well, and at what point do you think it'll dissolve? Because I feel like there are so many films. The first time I was really aware of it, I know there were, prior to Short Bus being at Cannes, there were other films that had explicit sex in it for years and years and years, obviously throughout the history of time. But now I feel like it's becoming a place that, so for instance, half the art in the Louvre was considered pornographic at some point, right? So at what point, how long do you think it'll be? Like, where are we on the timeline of when it just becomes part of everyday cinema?
And Kim Pali always says the Vatican has the largest collection of pornography in the world. Well, that's a good question. Is mainstream conventional porn going to become more toned down, or is Hollywood going to get more explicit? They have to meet somewhere. And, as we all know, in the 70s, Hollywood let its hair down, and you had movies that practically had explicit sex in them. And obviously, the obvious ones like Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, and The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. And, there's particular movies that had explicit sex. Or almost had explicit sex. But now, I would say the world now is like extremely schizophrenic. It's like you have the internet, which is just, and smartphones for kids, and kids watch porn when they're extremely young and are very kind of familiar with it and not fazed by it. I just read something where Billie Eilish said that she started watching porn when she was like 9 years old or 11 years old or something. So these kids know what's going on. They're not idiots. In fact, they know more than their parents, from a very young age. And they know how to get around parental controls, believe me. And, so.
We all do. We all did.
Yeah. And but there's a new morality too. There's a new moralism as well, I think, towards sex. And you see that not only concerning, the regression to the extreme right and fundamentalist religious groups and all that stuff. But even in feminism, I mean, you can get away with a lot less now. I mean, certain subjects are taboo, certain ways of representing them. I mean, with my film Narcisse, my new film, it was partly funded by the CBC. Again, ironically, the very institution that turned me into a pornographer in the first place. You could argue, since I watched all the movies on their, station, but they won't show it. They show it on their platform, on their more kind of like boutique platform, but they won't show it on the major network because of what I've heard is because of one scene, which is not the two twins making love with each other, where you never see their genitals, but it's a scene, the scene where the camera pans from two women making love, one of them pregnant in a bed, and the camera pans over to one of their young kids who's watching them, right, in the same shot. And what people are uncomfortable about with that is that the actor, the child actor, is obviously in the same room as these two women simulating sex, even though they have their clothes on. There's no nudity, So right. one is visibly pregnant. So, but this is a scene that needs to be represented because every filmmaker, like from David Lynch to probably, I don't know who else, like De Palma, they would, this scene, this idea of a child watching the parents have sex is so instrumental to childhood development and how you develop as a person. It's a common theme. It's a Freudian theme. And, of course I could have cut to this young actor and shot it separately, but it adds a dimension to the scene, that otherwise wouldn't be there if the child wasn't present. So, I mean, look at what they compare. I mean, Friedkin would never be able to get away with what he got away with in The Exorcist now. I don't think. I mean, what Linda Blair was put through. I mean,
right.
It seems inconceivable now. So it's a new kind of mentality, and sometimes it goes too far. I think it's like it's a prudery or to not acknowledge childhood sexual development it will make everything much worse, because repression always breeds neurosis or psychosis. I mean, what is completely sexually denied or repressed comes back, usually and erupts in a monstrous form, So I find it a bit disturbing. So you have those two elements. You have like this completely full access to pornography 24/7, and you have an industry that is kind of like taking. Hollywood is really kind of desexualizing everything now. I mean, all the superhero movies are desexualized, even though they're like made to look like sexual gods and goddesses. They don't have any sexual thoughts or behavior,
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, I love that Joel Schumacher put nipples on the bat suit. I don't think they could do that today.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure there's more sex in those movies than there is now. Right.
Were you raised religious?
No, not really. I mean, no. I mean, I was born into the most boring Christian sect imaginable, the United Church. It's a Protestant church, but it's like so bland. It's almost a little austere, and there's no passion to it. There's no aesthetic. It's just like a kind of plain kind of thing. So that's why I developed a fetish for Catholicism, which I would see in movies like Ken Russell's The Devils or in Pasolini or whatever nunsploitation movies, and I kind of developed from a young age an interest in Catholicism because it's so baroque and kind of psychosexual, and the lives of saints are full of fetishes and sexual perversion, and as a filmmaker, it's just much more appealing.
Have you seen the Verhoeven movie, the new one?
I'm halfway through it. Yeah.
Cool. Don't tell me. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. I like it.
Cool.
So far. I mean, I'm a big Verhoeven fan. So.
Yeah, me too. How did you find Félix-Antoine, who played
Félix-Antoine? This movie was made pretty much, it's my biggest budget film. Like Gerontophilia was made with a union crew, which I'd never worked with before making these films in Quebec. So it's made in a kind of industry, more of in an industry style. So we had professional casting agency. We looked at about 20 young men, and he was one that came in for the audition.
He is so good in this movie.
I think he's really good.
How did you do some of those shots where they're obviously it's him in both parts, but entwined with himself?
Yeah, there's two amazing things that some people tell me after screening sometimes. One is some people have told me that they actually thought, or after they'd watched it, that they actually thought it was from the 70s, that it wasn't a film made, now about the 70s or set in the 70s. And some people say they thought it was two actors, And
that's great.
Yeah. And, we really tried to keep it as old school as possible. So, of course, The Parent Trap was a big influence. And, that's just classic split screen stuff, which is very simple to do. I mean, for me, it didn't seem simple, but I kept on saying to my producer, Nicolas Comeau, I would say, Nicolas, I've never done these special effects like this before. Like, how am I going to do it? And he just would always say, oh, don't worry about it. It's not that complicated. So I just had to figure it out as I went along. I mean, we did have special effects. We had meetings with special effects people. And so I was learning how to do it. But we kept the CGI to a minimum. There's only maybe 8 or 10 CGI shots, which are extremely expensive in the whole film. Like, for example, when the twins are riding together on the same motorcycle at the end, that's a CGI face replacement. And we did that, in a few other scenes, I think 8 altogether or 9. And the rest was just split screen and body doubles. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I loved about it is that it's classic. I love anything that you can do in camera.
Yeah.
Like on the set where it's clearly just thought out and rhythmically placed, and there's like this beautiful sort of like composition. The camera work was amazing. Yeah.
It's Michel Laveau. He's a legendary Quebecois cinematographer, genius with light. And the thing is, he's older than me, and he's worked with a lot of the filmmakers that I was referencing in the movie, from the 70s and 80s. So he actually used lenses from the 70s and or 70s lenses and a lighting. He used a lighting kit that he would have used in the 70s as well. So that's what gives it its kind of authenticity.
That's so good.
Yeah. And one thing is almost randomly, our data guy suggested that we could mix live on set. So, which made a big difference. Say we're in the woods and we wanted to get the eye, what's it called? Level.
The eye line.
Eye line. We wanted to get it perfect. So we would shoot him in one scene, like full screen with the actor with him on one side and the body double on the other. And then we'd switch them and switch their costumes. And then we'd have both, and we could kind of line it up live to make sure that the eye line was perfect, like on a monitor. So it was kind of almost like a bit of live mixing on the set,
How long was the shoot?
Yeah. It was only 22 days, believe it or not, which is crazy. The script, when the first AD broke down the script, it was supposed to be like 27 minimum, I would say. So we ended up having to cut scenes. There's some scenes at the beginning there where I used these drawings that Beatrice, the mother, does, which were originally intended to be flashbacks. And so I just did them as kind of these drawings. And so we cut some scenes before shooting. And then we also had to cut a few scenes in the final edit that weren't working. And but yeah, it was a crazy breakneck speed to be shooting at.
Yeah, I kind of like those though, because then I don't know. I mean, the one that I just directed, which is in post now, we did it so quickly and there was so much magic happening that I turned to my DP at one point and I said, we're not able to cherish the magic because we're already doing the next thing, and then at the end you're like, I know that was magical, but I can't remember a damn thing. We just,
Well, yeah, I do like that feeling when you're shooting so intensely that, you can't even, it seems like what you shot in the morning was like, a week ago or something.
Yes.
Yeah,
totally. So in the realm of, you've also done directed to theater.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of theater in Berlin between 2008 or 7 and 2012. So for about 5 or 6 years there. The actress is Susanna Zaxa, who starred in Raspberry Reich, and she's been in a number of my films, The Misandrist, and she got me into theater at the How Theater in Berlin, and she has a theater collective called the Cheap Collective. So I did 2 projects with them, theater projects, and then I did an adaptation of Pierrot Lunaire, Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire, at the Hebel am Ufer Theater, which is this insanely beautiful theater from the turn of the last century that still operates in Berlin. And that was a steep learning curve too, because theater people are completely different, especially when you're working in these old established theaters, and especially in Berlin, in Germany, where the theatrical tradition is so strong, and so it was very challenging.
Do you like to do things that you don't know anything about before you get into them?
Yeah, I'm pretty much a fake it till you make it kind of guy. I do like the challenge. I mean, it's one reason why I've made these 2 Quebec films is I wanted to know what it's like to make a more industry style film. And it's never too late. You can always, believe me, like all those years of guerrilla filmmaking completely come in handy when you're making, an industry style film, but you don't have enough time. And, so all those instincts kick in, like what you're madly editing things in your head as the clock is ticking, and what what shot, that one shot that you need, and all that kind of thing is all from the guerrilla training.
Did you ever get arrested for shooting something?
Oh my God. I've had a long history of like run-ins with police, believe me. Never literally arrested miraculously, but even in the early in the 90s in Toronto, I'd have the labs call the cops on me for my films, which were sexually explicit, and the cops would come and they want me to edit that stuff out of the negative for my film Super 8.5. No, it was No Skin Off Mask. I was trying to get it blown up to 16 millimeter from Super 8, and the lab owner called the cops, and the cops watched it, and they wanted me to literally cut 3 scenes out of the negative, destroy them. Bondage with discipline, nudity with violence, and sucking of toes. I always remember they had it written down. And so this would be in 91, I think. So I had a good relationship with the lab owner. I'm not sure why he called the cops on me. He said that he was obliged to whenever he saw something sexually explicit at that time. And so he left the negative on the table, the counter, of his lab. And he said, I have to go in the back and take care of something. And he said, if this isn't here when I come back, there's really nothing I can do about it. So he basically let me take it away without cutting it. And then we ended up sending it to Germany, I guess. I've had photo labs in the 90s call the cops on me. One story is I was making Super 8.5, and we were shooting on a highway outside of Toronto. And I had these 2 girls dressed in total fetish wear and stilettos who played incestuous sisters, the Friday sisters, who would go around. It was a film within the film, and they would go around kidnapping male hitchhikers and cutting off their ponytails and diapering them on the side of the road and leave them, inside the road. But they were carrying really real-looking guns, the actors. And the truck that we were using, that they were driving around in, got stuck in the mud in the shoulder of the road. So we had to call a tow truck. And then, of course, I had the idea, the director's idea. I was like, oh, why don't you pull the guns and make it look like you're forcing him to pull the tow truck driver to pull the truck out, but at gunpoint, and so they did, and they made it look really real. And a lot of the cars going by, I didn't even know if there was cell phones then, but the cars going by, people called the police, and 2 cherry tops and 4 or 5 motorcycle cops pulled up in the middle of all this and they got out of their car with their guns pulled because they thought it was a real, crime going on. It was kind of dangerous.
My God.
Yeah. And then we always wormed our way out of it by saying it's a student film. We said, oh, we're just students. We didn't know. I'm sorry. These aren't real guns, Yeah. And they just,
yeah.
And that happened it's happened to me. It happened during Hustler White in LA too. They would even if we're shooting on Santa Monica Boulevard, the cops would come and they'd say, do you have permits, blah, blah, blah. And we'd say we're a student film. And they'd say, okay, well, if, wrap it up, we're going to come back in a couple of hours. And if you're still here, we're going to arrest you, So
there was a time, I can't remember when it was, that I sort of just crossed the line and said, I can't physically run for it anymore. So it's like, I don't want to do guerrilla.
Yeah. I mean, you do have to be, I don't know, when you're younger, maybe you also have more nerve, or I never had, it wasn't about that. I mean, it always made me extremely anxious. I didn't want this to be happening, but, and when I was in it, we got chased out of the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, for shooting there, illegally. I mean, I just shot this porn film for Erica Lust, The Affairs of Lydia in Montreal. And we even had the cops come for that because even though it was a big budget for a porn, we couldn't afford to clear the street. Right. And so it's set in the fashion industry. And one of the locations is this little dress shop that one of the characters has. And so I got the art department to make these really obscene window displays with mannequins fucking each other and giving me each other head and everything. And, with some nude photos, and people started complaining, and they said, there was a public school nearby, and kids were walking by and everything. And so the cops came, and it was the same. It was like reliving the old days. The producer talked them into letting us stay for another hour and a half or something to finish the scene we were working on. And then we had to, we just finished shooting the scenes that showed the window displays, and then shot the rest, dismantled it and shot the rest in the other direction. So it still happens.
Filmmaker Bruce LaBruce. Tune in next time for more Filmmaking Confidential. It is totally free to subscribe, and when you subscribe, you'll get upcoming new episodes automatically, and you'll have free access to all our past shows. The Filmmaking Confidential podcast is a production of Dakanga Audio and produced by myself and Ella Spencer. Our original theme music is composed by Kevin Robles. For more of the Filmmaking Confidential podcast, head over to filmmakingconfidential.com. If you have a question about filmmaking you'd like me to answer on the podcast, send me an email using the contact form on the website. To learn more of my filmmaking secrets, be sure to pick up a copy of the book, Filmmaking Confidential. Available on Audible, paperback, and ebook, wherever books are sold. I'm Steve Balderson. Thanks for listening and spreading the word. Until next time, keep making, keep doing, keep going.